art is meant to make you think critically about things. It has that role, I think, in society where it does make you think about, serious things that are going on. I referenced a play that I saw, which was on the surface about a worm farmer, but it was really talking about topics of immigration, and it can start conversations around that.
And he said of the 373 different venues that put on gigs last financial year, just 19 hosted 100 or more shows in that time, including MoshPit. So this is a significant loss when it's one of the 19 venues that has the most shows in Sydney closing down.
As opposed to, hey, it's my local, let's go out and have a good time and see live music because that's what I like to do. I think the cost of living also has a big part to play.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Hot take.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
You saw The Odyssey yesterday. How did you like it?
I did. I loved it. I thought it was epic. Regular listeners or people who know me know that I don't watch movies often, let alone I hadn't been to movies in like a couple of years, but my partner and I had gotten we listened to a podcast that was kind of explaining the original poem, like just detailing it first for this like really important context, because you could see how you would sit down that film if you don't understand the context and be like, what is going on? And that was really useful. It's called The Rest is History. Shout outs to The Rest is History. If you are interested in that and you want to see the movie, I would highly recommend listening to the podcast first. We stopped listening about halfway through part 2, so we didn't, not intentionally, but it meant we didn't listen to the end. So it got us enough to understand everything that was going on, but not to know what happens.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that approach. But yeah, really, really unreal in terms of just like a cinematic experience. It was super enthralling. And the message at the end was basically just about humanity's inability to learn from its mistakes and the futility of war. And I was like, well, that's probably always pertinent, but it just felt pertinent, obviously, at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know how into the weeds you've gotten with the behind the scenes stuff about, because everything I've read, because I've also seen the film and enjoyed the film, and then later found out that there was next to no CGI throughout the entire film, and that the big puppet, or the big, one-eyed monster in the cave is just a massive puppet. They were physically on the ships, filming. They were the scene where they're in the woods, the massive, huge giants. That's their actual people. Then there's no CGI. It's actually just massive people and short people and camera effects and positioning. And then the scene, this, I guess, small spoiler if you haven't seen it, but the scene where the witch turns the soldiers into pigs, that's not CGI. That's just practical effects and camera trickery and whatnot. And it's like my mind was blown.
Really?
Like, I already really rated Christopher Nolan as a director. Like, he'd be my favorite. But having seen that film and knowing that it was actually shot on IMAX, which can only run for 3 minutes at a time before they need to put new film in the cameras, and like, he made life hard for himself and for everyone involved, but the end result is worth it.
Yeah, I knew some of those things, not all of those things, but that is really cool. It's like one for the purists. It's a very much a feat of human creativity, especially in a world where like you could AI that shit, or like not to that extent, but you could lean on that crutch.
It felt like a statement, actually, the fact that there wasn't any CGI used in that film. It's like, and yeah, the fact it was all shot on original, IMAX cameras. I think it's the first film in history to be fully recorded on IMAX cameras. It was edited, the original, like can't remember how many there were, the 40 odd around the country, like IMAX theaters that were showing it in its true
40 around the world.
Yeah. So did I say country? Yeah, 40 around the world. There was only one in the Southern Hemisphere, which was in Melbourne, that shows it properly on the original negative. So it was actually proper film that was being shown, and it's not really my area of expertise, all that stuff, but I just found it so fascinating. So props to Christopher Nolan for putting a film that we're talking about on a music podcast. But what we will say before we do get into the story is that if, Nolan's films, it's getting rave reviews, The Odyssey, at the moment. And if you like this podcast, you can also leave rave reviews on your podcasting platform of choice, and it would actually really help us, really help spread this podcast to more people who might also enjoy it.
Yes, yeah. So I've just been listening to other podcasts. Cam and I are both avid podcast listeners, and I've realised that we never really ask people to do that. I was like, we know there's a solid contingent of you that listen regularly. You listen all the way through. You're there. If that number was reflected in our reviews, that would be great. So if you are a regular listener, could you please do us a favour? Jump on, give us a 5-star review or whatever star you reckon for us, preferably 5. We'll send you $1. No, but whatever you reckon, that would be awesome, because we've been kind of pushing beneficiary algorithm. We've been trying to capitalize on the algorithms on Instagram, on YouTube, to some success so far. And we've kind of like, we should really be pushing it in the podcast space too. So that's just a little PSA for you out there. If you are listening, you like our stuff, you listen regularly, which we know there's a good chunk of you. Could you please give us a review? That would be awesome. Thank you.
It would be awesome. And hopefully you decided to leave that review before Eamon was stumbling between algorithmic and algorithm and
beneficiary. And yeah. I promise I have a grasp of the English language. It just sometimes escapes.
Oh, mate, me and you both, don't you worry about that. But yes, if you could, that would be hugely appreciated. And it would also help our podcasts be seen by more like-minded music lovers in Australia.
That it would. And a timely reminder too, if you are an audio only listener, we have been for the last couple of months just been putting the full episodes up on YouTube, and some little clips, like not Instagram short reel style clips, but like a 5-minute chunk of the pods up there too. So if you want to subscribe to us on YouTube and consume us in that way too, that is an option for you. We're kind of like, we've always tried to be philosophically audio first, I think, coming from radio backgrounds. So that is kind of like, our arrangement. But YouTube, we are there if you want to engage with our stuff there, and you can see just a random PSA if you are. I want to thank Gabby Lou Garnett, Central Coast musician who we interviewed recently. I jig around a lot, and since we started doing the videos, like I've been watching, I'm like, oh shit, like I'm kind of just like bobbing and jigging. It's just like something. And she was like, get a fidget spinner. I was like, I think I've got one. Dug it out. And so when I'm recording, I'm like just spinning this fidget spinner, where if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see it in my hand right now. And it has reduced the jigging by about 80%, I reckon. It's just like somewhere for that energy to go. So that's a shout out. If you need that, shout outs to Gabby Lou Garnett, GG, for the suggestion. Listen to her recent episode with us if you are interested. But if you're a jigger like me and you want to try and control it, it works.
It's funny. I do a similar thing. Like, I just looked over at my desk and I have a pen in my hand that I'm sort of just fiddling with, because I saw it down there, and I do a similar thing, because otherwise I'm swaying in my chair and like that. It's very distracting visually to look at. And my desk is a little bit wobbly. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the camera and the microphone shaking a little bit. But so I've currently got a pen but then occasionally I'll drop it and then you hear it in the background and it's like, oops, sorry, that's me. So, and then I'd put it away, and then 5 minutes later I'd pick up the pen again. So we have these little things. But anyway, thank you for watching on YouTube. If you are, thank you for leaving a hopefully 5-star review. If you have left us a review, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or the Android third-party ones, whichever one you're listening to us on, we would really appreciate a 5-star review, or however the ratings are, a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe, all the stuff. We don't ask for that very often, as Eamon said, so we're just doing it at the top of this one. So thank you very much for your attention to this matter. But we have an update for you, which is relating to what we spoke about 2 weeks ago in the music news, which is the Divine Playhouse.
Yes. So we spoke in our last music news. You might have seen us put some stuff out on socials on this as well, and on our YouTube, about the Sydney venue Divine Playhouse, which was forced at that stage to close temporarily following its opening by its landlord. Bit of background on that. So there's been a couple of updates. Divine Playhouse, which was operated by Heaps Gay Events, which is a LGBTQIA plus events and like kind of party group in Sydney. They had opened and then they'd opened a venue in a former church, a church that had been deconsecrated nearly a century ago. They had opened a venue that was, a performance, a music venue, an arts culture venue, party venue, whatever you want to call it, in this former church. It was called Divine Playhouse. It was previously called Unholy Playhouse. They changed it at the last minute because of concerns from the Christian community. They opened on the July 8th with the intention of platforming live music, performance, culture, and it was obviously built as an inclusive space, particularly for the LGBTQIA plus community. It was very swiftly met with criticism and protests from Christian groups who protested the fact that it was a former church that was being used to host queer events, and also that in some cases those events satirically drew on Christian tradition and iconography, which they deemed as disrespectful. So 8 days later, they were forced to close temporarily after their landlord, lodged a notice they're demanding it cease engaging in offensive trade. They said, the landlord, that Divine Playhouse insulted and mocked the sincerely held religious beliefs of millions of Christian Australians, and it was given 2 days to cease those operations. And then basically since we published that episode, like typically for us, not long after, we do these music news once a fortnight. So it's a little bit old news, but I'm sure, if you listen to us, you might want the update. The venue, the lease was completely terminated by that landlord. And not only that, there was also a protest against the termination of this lease and the whole saga that took place in Hyde Park that drew thousands of people.
Yeah, so that's pretty much where we left you a couple of weeks ago when we had, thoughts and opinions on both sides, which is what we were hoping to receive as well. We'll touch on that in a little bit, but just to bring up to speed now as to what's happening, as Eamon said, there was that event at Hyde Park, and the venue has closed down. Now, a Rolling Stone report, they're reporting that organisers claim that an obscure 1842 law in New South Wales is being used pretty much to shut down the space. And that law was used, as I said, from 1842. Is when it was introduced, and it was to regulate foul smells and industrial waste, which I don't see how that relates. So to me, they've found some sort of loophole in a really old law as a way to shut down the venue.
Yes, it's like that. I don't know if this is true, so don't try this, but it was true at some point. Or I was told this at some point. It was like, if you're in Canberra, you can take a piss on like the back left wheel of your car or something like that, and it's legal. Something like that. I'm probably butchering this. But I was told this years ago. And it was like one of those old, or like, you can still legally walk cattle across the Sydney Harbour Bridge back when there was more agricultural land either side. So it feels like one of those, but for rental, where they're like, how can we get him? How can we get him? And they've had their lawyers look through the leasing laws in New South Wales. They found a dated law dated by, 180 odd years or 150 years or so. And it's used to regulate foul smells and industrial waste, so more like physically offensive than morally offensive. And then they've used that to terminate the lease, which...
sorry, it's just reminding me of Parks and Rec when you were talking about the obscure laws. There's an episode, it's called Ted Day or something, and there's effectively you can legally throw someone named Ted in the river on this day every year, and it's just because Ted was, when they wrote out the law, it was meant to be T in the river, but the A looked like a D, so they just find someone named Ted and throw them in the river. That's what this is, in my mind, relating to.
Shout outs to all the Teds listening. Hope you don't get thrown in a river. But yeah, it just does have that feel to it. And the first question I have with that is like, well, why did you give him the lease in the first place? Like, surely you were aware of the group that was organising the lease, the venue they were planning to operate out of your building. If you weren't, then you're not a good landlord. You're not doing your due diligence on your prospective tenants to accept the lease and then be like, oh, hang on, I don't like this, and then try and like retrospectively quickly find a law to get out. It just seems messy and stupid. Like, there could have been a better way. Like, of course, it's your venue, whatever. You're welcome to do what you want with it within reason.
But as
yeah,
you say, do that before you agree to sign the lease and put the tenants in, and then they make all the modifications to suit their business, and then
exactly
suddenly you're kicking them out when there's a bit of a public outcry over it to begin with. I don't imagine this was any part of the initial lease signing either, because otherwise they would have been referencing that as a result for a breach of lease to terminate the lease. They've had to go to, as we're saying, this obscure law to evict them. So I agree with you saying you're free to do with your commercial premises as you see fit under the law. Of course, you can't be discriminatory for those reasons as well. But if you have other reasons why you don't want a venue or a business going into your premises, then that's your prerogative. But don't give them the lease and then a few days later turn around and evict them.
Yeah, it just seems silly ultimately. So a statement from Heaps Gay, they've said, "It's over, our lease terminated, our artists cancelled, our venue being cleared out. We believe this termination was unlawful and unjust. I'm devastated, I'm angry for us, for our artists, the city and its people." That's Heaps Gay organiser Kat Dopper. "Our sense of injustice is overwhelming. Divine Playhouse was created as a critical new cultural home for diverse artists and communities from all over Sydney and New South Wales. It's sitting empty, no artists, no audiences. The joy and community we built in that room silenced. That's freedom of expression in Australia right now. Some voices get amplified, others get evicted. In this case, it feels like bigotry masquerading as a moral victory."
Strong words.
Yes.
Particularly, the end part of that, but also the whole sentiment, which is what we were highlighting in our previous episode as well, is that this is a venue in Sydney which is desperate at the moment for more venues, and we'll sort of go into that a bit deeper in our second story today, because it is relating to music venues and how there seems to be a real shortage of them, not just in Sydney, but everywhere, really. And we've seen the Queensland government trying to rectify that by new legislation to incentivise more things happening. But, on this statement, they've certainly touched on the fact that the artists, the Sydney, it's, the city, its people within it, they were desperate for something like this, and they had it for a matter of days before it was taken away.
Yes, yeah, and the reflection is just like, oh, this didn't really need to happen. Like, I just feel, as I said, silly. Because
this is the other thing too, right? Like I mentioned, not only have they, gone in and made the modifications and set up the business in that premises, but in the meantime, now they're without a venue. They said that they were looking for another venue, but they could have, instead of going for that venue, they could have maybe a week or two later been approved to a separate venue. And right now we could have that venue operating and running, Divine Playhouse events as intended in that different venue. But now we've sort of started and stopped and we're moving, and it's, complicating and just, as you said, silly, really, all round.
Yeah, just wasteful of time, money, energy, the whole lot. And, a lot of the criticism has been, they received $100,000 from the state government to start this venue up. Why did that happen? No doubt that money hasn't been used as efficiently as it would have otherwise been. There was artists booked who had to be cancelled and things like that. So, none of it ideal. Later in the week, over 2,000 people rallied in Hyde Park in Sydney to protest the closure of Divine Playhouse. So there was a snap rally, 2,000 people showed up. There were speakers. Those in attendance were hearing speeches from Deputy Lord Mayor of Sydney, Jess Miller, New South Wales Greens MP Kate Fairman, MEAA Delegate Charlie Alana, drag artists, etc., broadcaster Ben Law, and there were also statements of support from the New South Wales Arts Minister John Graham and independent MP Alex Greenwich, which suggests that the state government isn't backing away from the fact that they delivered a grant to Divine Playhouse, which I think is fine as well. I don't think there's an issue with that, despite the criticism. Since that closure and the protests, 20,000 people have signed a petition supporting Divine Playhouse, and almost $50,000 has been raised in legal costs. Whether they intend to fight it on the grounds of the lease termination isn't quite clear yet. They have indicated, though, that they're it's not over whether the venue is opened elsewhere now or whether they challenge this decision. We're not sure, but I don't think it's the end of the venue. It's just they're going to have to kind of go back to the drawing board and kind of either start again or decide to launch a challenge.
Yeah, I'm curious. What would you do in that situation? Like, if you were Heaps Gay Events and Divine Playhouse, would you fight it to try and, because as I said, they would have gone in and made the modifications and spent money on the venue to bring it up to where they want it to be. Would you fight it and try to stay there, or would you just view it as we're better off just cutting our losses, opening as a separate venue, maybe learning from the entire experience, what you can and what you couldn't have done differently, control the controllables, so to speak. Do you then just open up a different venue and sort of maybe use some of the marketing and PR from the current debate to try and help you launch elsewhere, maybe in a venue that might be a bit more supportive of what you're trying to do, that wouldn't have as much of a backlash around it? Or would you stand firm and actually try and fight this to keep it as it is?
I think that would depend on whether or not, how motivated you were for it to be a statement. Because if you are able to challenge the lease termination, get that lease extended, you're locking yourself in, you get the venue back, which would be a statement. You get to use that venue as intended, which would be a statement. However, you're locking yourself into a undoubtedly toxic relationship with your landlord until the end of that lease, which undoubtedly won't be renewed. So in my mind, I'd go for the easier option and just go clean slate, try and find a venue that suits and go again. But if they are looking to make a statement and challenge this, we asked the question on our YouTube, is this cultural censorship, from the groups that had protested it? Is it, freedom of speech? Is it, freedom of morale, or, pushes for morality, or cultural censorship? They don't like what this culture looks like. They're trying to close it down. So if you're looking at it through that lens, maybe the statement is worthy, but I think, I don't know if the baggage of that relationship with your landlord, knowing you're going to have to move in 12 months anyway, if that's worth the trouble. And that wouldn't be for me to say, but it's an interesting question nonetheless.
Yeah, if I was in that position, I would, as you say, because you'd just be pushing, it'd be an uphill battle the entire way. And to try and operate a business, which is already hard enough, as you say, you're constantly at what's the, anyway, if you're at ends with your landlord all the time.
At odds?
Yeah, at odds, thank you. Maybe if you're at wit's end, or maybe I was confused. Anyway, as we said at the start, English is hard and I don't speak it very well. But if you're constantly fighting your landlord, then yeah, it probably makes sense just to try and find out a venue that will be more supportive and you can work with the landlord in that sense and operate the venue the way that you want it to and have it be that inclusive environment as it is intended. But as you said, we'll have to wait and see what they actually do with that. I mentioned that we did get some feedback on both sides that we were looking for, some comments and reactions. And we did have a comment on our YouTube video, which, from the full podcast. So by all means, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can always leave your thoughts, comments, opinions down below on YouTube. Also on Spotify as well, you can leave a comment as well. Maybe just comment, what should we get them? Let's get some engagement bait happening. What should we ask people to comment to say that they've listened at least to this part of the episode? Just like a pizza emoji or something, or like maybe tell us your favorite. No
pizza iconography, that's cursed. Maybe a church emoji. But genuinely just interested in your opinions.
Or a
on
rainbow.
This. Or a rainbow. Church or rainbow. There you go. Nice and simple. Because we asked I think Cam and I kind of were broadly supportive of Divine Playhouse in our takes on it in our last episode. And I personally believe you should be, fair to kind of draw on and criticize and satirize religion. I don't think that should be off limits. The question that we were talking about off air that I kind of landed on, and maybe the comment that we're about to read will pose that question to yourself, is there is a line somewhere in that though. Yes, you should be free to criticize, satirize, and interpret and draw on religion in our society, in my view. However, there would be a line, there is a point where that line gets crossed and it's no longer acceptable. I don't think that's happened in the case of the Divine Playhouse. Of course, people from the Christian community disagree. And we had a YouTube commenter that we're going to read from that represents that perspective, because we're obviously kind of probably on the other side of the camp. But they engaged with us and commented in like a really respectful and considered way, which we really appreciated. It's really nice to see debates play out in that way. I think if every debate played out in that way, the world would be a whole lot better. But we'd love to just kind of hear what you reckon about this, because obviously we have our take. But reading this comment was food for thought for me, at least as well.
Yeah, so let's get into that comment. It is by username snave1989. They said, "What upset me as a Christian was the way Christianity appeared to become the centerpiece of the entertainment. The promotional material and performances included references to unholy branding, parodies of Christian beliefs and symbols, and interviews from attendees describing it as an open mockery of Christianity. For many Christians, these aren't simply props or costumes. They represent deeply held beliefs that are sacred. Art, I agree with you, can facilitate questions, challenge ideas, and encourage critical thinking, but I struggle to see what meaningful conversation is invited by a performer dressed as a winged pig serving McDonald's French fries while presenting them as the body of Christ. To me, that wasn't a critique of power or an explanation of faith. It reduced one Christianity's most sacred acts, the Eucharist or Holy Communication, to a joke. For millions of Christians, the Eucharist, am I pronouncing that?
Eucharist
correctly?
And Holy Communion, yeah.
Yeah. The Eucharist is a profound remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice and expression of faith. Seeing it portrayed in that way was deeply hurtful. I don't hate anyone, and I don't believe anyone should be mistreated because of their sexuality or identity. I also recognize that not everyone shares my beliefs. I support everyone's right to live in safety and dignity, but I believe people of faith deserve that same respect." So the art facilitating questions and challenging ideas was something that we raised in our last episode, which was that, art is meant to make you think critically about things, whether it is, as you say, poking fun of religion. It has that role, I think, in society where it does make you think about, serious things that are going on. I referenced a play that I saw, which was on the surface about a worm farmer, but it was really talking about topics of immigration, and it can start conversations around that. But obviously, the Christianity side to it really has, upset a lot of the people in that community, which I can certainly understand. But as Eamon said, there should be the freedom to make jokes at the expense of religion. But I think a lot of Christians tend to feel, without wanting to speak for the community, of course, but a lot of common things that I do see in relation to it is that, well, you wouldn't make that joke about, a Muslim faith, or you wouldn't make that joke about, a different religion. You're always making fun of Christians and Christianity, which is what I see quite a bit. So maybe that is also tied into this.
Yeah, I think there's definitely food for thought in this. I think we should still be able, I can understand why someone of Christian faith would be offended, but whether that offense means you shouldn't be able to do that anymore is ultimately the question we're asking. Whether that offense means venue can't operate, close down, no, is the question that we're asking. People are going to be offended by things, but are those things then completely shut down? I think this is where it's like, it is very subjective, but what my view is, it's like Christianity has, for the most part, for thousands of years, particularly in our society, had the rub of the green. They have, been in a position of power and dominance. And when you look at the kind of punch up versus punch down question, I think that's kind of where I land with that. You're kind of punching up to a very powerful institution, and particularly, as we mentioned, to the LGBTQIA plus, has caused a lot of harm over the years. That's undeniable. There's still kind of gay conversion therapy that was only recently been outlawed in this country, and a lot of people still pushing for it. And I'm not saying that is all Christian beliefs. Clearly, it's not the belief of this commenter, but there's all that context in there as well. For what it's worth, I think that's saying like you should be able to make these critiques and criticisms and satirizations of all religions. I don't think it should just only be allowed of Christianity. But the question it did make me consider is like, well, okay, where is that line? There is a line somewhere. Where is the line? I think it'd probably be case by case. You'd have to just see what happened. I don't know if I could, broadly draw it at this point. I don't pretend I have all the answers here, but it was definitely, food for thought. And I really appreciated the way that commenter engaged and shared their perspective, because it definitely made us think, even if it's not going to, make us agree with them, it definitely made us think. And we appreciate the respectfulness with which they commented. And hopefully, hopefully our engagement with this has been respectful too. It has been our intention. But yeah, interesting there. That's an update on the Divine Playhouse situation. We'll keep you updated if there's anything more to it. But that's the meat for now. We are going to move on to another venue in Sydney issue, I suppose. So it hasn't been a great few weeks for venues in Sydney. Well, it hasn't been a great few years for venues in Sydney. It hasn't been a great bloody 20 years for venues in Sydney, to be completely honest with you. Yeah. So venue named MoshPit has announced its closure coming up in November. It's an inner west Sydney live music venue. This has been obviously very devastating for the Erskineville dive bar and the community that regularly patronises MoshPit. It's going to be shutting its doors, citing rising operating costs and declining revenues. But not only is the closure of this venue a story, there's also been some interesting commentary around, the receiving of grant money by that venue from both the state and federal government, and whether that was targeted correctly or whether that was an appropriate use of grant money in the first place. So there's quite a few facets to this story that we're going to try and cover. This reporting comes via the ABC, and just for what it's worth, a lot of the reporting that we reference in the Divine Playhouse story comes via the Music Network, just to give credit to those great publications. So the venue has MoshPit. The venue received grants over the last few years. It's on King Street in Sydney. Received more than 150 grand in New South Wales and federal grants over the past few years to improve music infrastructure. So just a quick rundown of that history. It received $64,000 from the federal government's Revive Live grant scheme last financial year. That was to cover equipment, infrastructure and accessibility costs. In 24-25 financial year, it received 87 grand from the New South Wales government to improve accessibility, ventilation, equipment and soundproofing. And it also received 30 grand in 2023 to build emerging bands and support rising talent from the federal government's Live Music Australia program. Now, for their part, the MoshPit owner, Mitchell McLennan, said the grants definitely made a difference in improving the venue's stage and soundproofing, but they could not keep the venue open alone. He said quite plainly, the cost of alcohol goes up every 6 months and people feel it. A schooner of beer is $11. That's a huge amount. People are just staying home.
Which is, a common thing that we hear a lot is that it's too expensive to go out, the cost of living the way that it is. But those, I think, 150,000, because that is, as you said, one of the debates around this is that it has received $150,000 in federal grant in taxpayer money. Sorry, state and federal, but it's still, taxpayer money. And it's still closing down. So has that been an effective spend? I would argue that upgrading infrastructure, equipment, soundproofing, ventilation, all of that is, I think, money well spent if you are intending on hosting live music, because it all ties into the big experience, right? The largest scheme of things is that if you go to a venue and it has terrible soundproofing, bad ventilation, you're not likely to want to go back. And I think of the Beery as a great example of that on the Central Coast, where we're from in Terrigal. They used to host live music events, and it was just not the best place to see a live music. There was they were cramped in on stage. There was a big pole that was in the way. It always got really hot and sweaty because the ventilation was poor. It was a shit experience. But
and I actually have it on good authority from a friend who recently saw the Jungle Giants there that they've addressed a lot of those issues, which is great to hear because I haven't been to a gig at the Brew for some time.
That's fantastic because it used to be a terrible experience, and you would be less inclined, like you'd go to see, you know, Jungle Giants or San Cisco, you know, Montaigne. I'm thinking of these bigger, you know, national acts who have played there over the years. You would spend your money to go and see them because, oh, they're playing on the Central Coast. That's really cool. But the more emerging acts, and this is the other element that we'll discuss about having a community there that sort of goes regardless of who's playing, just because it's at your local venue and you want to see live music. But if those elements like the soundproofing and the ventilation aren't there, you're not going to build that community because people aren't going to want to go back time and time again. So I think that's, you know, grant money well spent. And I think it's good that the government are offering up these grants as an incentive to these venues to be putting on live music. It's just a shame that in this instance, the venue is still closing.
Yeah, it is. It's a real shame. And I suppose it's a risk you take. And I would say also for those grants, like if those grants help keep the venue open another couple of years and got more bands on stages in that time and more audiences out and about, that's a good thing, irrespective of whether they eventually close. Also, the venue didn't know they were going to have to close, you know, like I'm sure they were very optimistic and wanting to continue, and the realities have made themselves clear as things have worn on. It's not like comparable to our recent discussion on Blues Fest, for example, where the writing was on the wall, they received a stack of money and then have made some outwardly, allegedly suspicious looking transactions, you know, and move that money around, and now, you know, the government's out of pocket and there was no event held. This money was used for its intended purpose and events continue to be held. They're just struggling to keep up now. But it's an interesting debate nonetheless. Shadow Arts Minister in New South Wales, Chris Rath, he said the $87,000 New South Wales grant went towards enhancing accessibility when the venue's closure came from rising costs. He said, why weren't the actual drivers of the venue considered when this grant was approved? The minister needs to be able to assure the public that when a substantial amount of their taxpayer funds is invested in something, there is a transparent process for how it will deliver lasting value. I think that's a valid question to ask, certainly, despite what I've just said. I think if this leads to perhaps better targeting of grants, that's a good thing. If we could kind of look at what does the venue need to remain sustainable, as well as what does the venue need from the perspective of infrastructure, and target grants in that way, I think that's absolutely a good way to do it. However, I don't think the existing grant money was necessarily wasted at the same time.
Yeah, I think upgrading that infrastructure, as I highlighted before, is a good use of money. I think without it, you would see that venue probably would have closed earlier, because either they need to spend more of their own money to do those upgrades, and therefore they have less of their own money to either do other sorts of upgrades or marketing or to pay for musicians or whatever the case is. That wouldn't have been spent there. It would have been spent on the upgrades to, you know, the soundproofing and the the ventilation, the accessibility, all of that stuff. So we could have even seen this venue close sooner than what it's already set to do. Or, as I said, you want to build a community of people who are going to gigs all the time. And if those things aren't right, they're not likely to return. So if you're not spending money on those sorts of upgrades, then you're not building a community, you're not building a culture of music going people in that town. So I do think, you know, I can understand why there are questions being raised, but I actually think you need to have those things in place before you can actually start properly building up that community of people, because you're not going to want to go consistently to a music venue to see just anyone if the other elements of that venue aren't right, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a whole process. And I think, I mean, like, if we look at that holistically and then we look at this debate holistically as well, the what we glean from this is that grants alone aren't enough to save a venue, and grants alone aren't enough to kind of stem this issue that we've got at the moment, where rising costs are creating issues and venues are closing quickly. There's more elements that need to be considered here, and more answers that we need to work out to stop this.
I don't think the expectation should be that a grant alone will save a venue. I don't think you should be going, oh shit, we're going to fall unless we can get state government support, because that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to be relying on the state or federal government to be giving you a handout every year to keep your venue functioning. Those grants, I think, should be used to better either the infrastructure or the marketing or whatever the case is. That should be used as an aid to support your business, not as a need, because without it, we will fail. I think that's... So if you're expecting that grant to stay afloat, then your business is already doomed. But if you can use it to, as I say, do these soundproof or ventilation upgrades so you don't need to spend it, so you can focus on other aspects of the business, that to me is a good use of grant funding.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's maybe an argument in the middle there where you could say if we're in trying times and it's needed to keep the venue going, but you obviously don't want to be dependent on it year on year on year for your venue to be sustainable. Certainly. So it's an interesting debate. And I think like I said, I don't think the grants are wasted. I think scrutinising how taxpayer money is spent is a good thing. I think if you can better target that money, that's a good thing too. For their part, Chris Rath, who's the Shadow Arts Minister in New South Wales, he said the Liberal opposition would help Sydney's nightlife by cutting payroll tax for small and medium businesses, which I'm sure would be a burden reliever in one way as well. But again, probably not the whole picture in terms of whether a venue stays alive or not. The New South Wales Labor government has given $5.1 million to 39 venues in the 24-25 financial year to upgrade music venue soundproofing, energy efficiency, and AV equipment, which I have no issues with at all. And the Federal Arts Minister was asked about kind of the closure of MoshPit on 702 ABC Sydney. He said that investing in the venue through the grants was worth the risk. Quote, even though they're private venues, every extra bit of assistance at the moment makes a difference. It's devastating when we lose one, but we're determined to make sure that live culture throughout the country is something that survives. You've just got to take the risk and keep investing and keep providing, because for a whole lot of venues, that investment actually will be the difference.
Yeah, it will, because at the end of the day, these venues rely on people coming to it to make money. It's, they're not a goods and service business where you can sort of just shut down a physical thing. All right, we've got an online website or an online shop and a warehouse. You need people coming to your business to survive. And if people aren't coming because the beer is too high, which is what the owner, Mitch McLennan, said, then the business isn't going to survive. So either, as you said, you use these grants to incentivize people to come, whether you're using grants to offset the tax on beer, or I don't know how you do it, but the other way is to actually just make the venue more appealing, which is through these sorts of upgrades. So without me continuing to hone on that point, the short of it is you need people to go to these venues, and that's what these grant assistance, should be used towards, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're playing a role, but it's like, as we mentioned, it's a multi-pronged problem that we're dealing with right now, because you've got the issue from the venue's perspective, no doubt, of liquor taxes that mean, every time you go to Sydney or even on the coast a lot now, you're spending over $10 just to buy a single beer, which is just never sustainable. And that's as a beer drinker. I'm like a bloke who drinks beer. I was speaking to my partner about this the other day, and as a woman, if you're purchasing a mixed drink or a cocktail or something and you're not keen on just having a beer, which is generally one of the cheaper things you can buy, you're up in $15 to $20 for a single drink, which is objectively absurd amount of money to be paying for a single drink, and it points to why people aren't going out.
Sorry, just very quickly on the topic of I went over the weekend. We're at sort of Shoal Bay, Nelson Bay area. We went out to a brewery probably 15, 20 minutes away, and it was $19 for a glass of wine.
Yep.
That is ridiculous.
Was it a $400 bottle of wine though?
I don't know. I didn't order it, but it was someone in our group ordered it, and I was like, That's stupid amounts. And then my wife just wanted a vodka lemon lime bitters, and that was $18, I think, which is still a lot of money to be spending on a beverage. But yeah, to your point, beer is typically seen as the cheapest option. And that is, I think, why a lot of people start to get into beer is because it's the cheapest option. But I personally am not a massive beer drinker. I much prefer spirits or a red wine. Anyway, I just had to throw that out there that I was at a venue over the weekend and drinks were stupidly expensive.
Yeah, and it points to the issue. And I don't think, I mean, there's some cases where you go to a place and you go like, mate, you're taking the piss. But for the most part, these venues, I'm sure, like they're aware of their margins. They have, significant costs to operate the business in the first place. That's the number they've landed on to sustainably operate and turn a profit. And we want businesses to be profitable. Otherwise, they're not sustainable. So that's one part. You've got the liquor taxing, and whatever the red tape that surrounds a business is, licensing, payroll taxing, whatever else. We know the state government has been working at alleviating some of those issues. There's also the change in consumer behavior, whether that's been born out of cost of living. As we see fuel skyrocketing again. For me, it's costing me like over $150 to fill my car up. Like that has an impact week to week. That means you can't do things as much anymore. When you're presented with going out, you want to buy 5 beers, you're paying $60-$70 just to drink beer. It's easy to see how those decisions are being made. But not only that, we've discussed the changes in behavior because of the COVID generation who didn't develop the habits of going out because we lost 2-3 years of going out. There's the lockouts before that. There's the whole culture within Sydney and more broadly New South Wales, I think, that hasn't developed that going out culture as well. It's been a really tricky few years, and there's a lot of factors that contribute to this. So grants are one part of it, but they're not all of it. To me, like I was speaking, Cam and I were speaking before this, and we're like, well, I don't think we're not going to leave the analysis of this story with any answers, probably just more questions. But it's interesting to have these discussions nonetheless. Someone else engaging in this discussion is Joe Hardy, who we've got a reference on this pod a bit. He does some really good analysis on his blog, Joe Blogs, but he also co-founded Sydney's most comprehensive gig guide. It's called sydneymusic.net, so they've got a whole bunch of gigs on there week in, week out. And he said of the 373 different venues that put on gigs last financial year, just 19 hosted 100 or more shows in that time, including MoshPit. So this is a significant loss when it's one of the 19 venues that has the most shows in Sydney closing down. And Joe Hardy has said it was disturbing that Sydney was losing venues that consistently put on live music. He said, quote, "That is where I start getting into red flashing alarm bells territory." He also made the really interesting point that venues in their successful eras gone by were always uniquely the hosts of communities. They weren't just spaces for hire, which is speaking to another wider issue, I suppose, which you could almost transplant to the festival discussion too, where it's like, rather than just being a venue that you go to see this particular band at this particular time, where we need to be developing venues where people are just going there, like no matter who's playing. That's just a place they go. They know they're going to have a good time. They know the bands are going to be good, much like maybe the Lincoln Pin on the Central Coast is. There's a cohort of people that just go there. And perhaps we're losing that as well because it's more of appointment type stuff for people going rather than regular patronage, which we know is kind of the backbone of a lot of hospitality venues. And Cam, you made the point that Bo Nielsen, when we spoke about My Gig Pass, made this point as well.
Yeah, it was just about building up the community. And I think the cost of living, as you mentioned, is certainly part of it. Like, people are just having to say, well, I can't afford to just go out and enjoy live music like I would like to. I actually need to bit more, I need to budget for that. And when you are being a bit more budget conscious, you are going to think, well, who do I want to spend that money on? Who do I need, and as a venue, you're thinking, who do I need to attract to, a headliner to get people to come along to the venue? And that's what we've come down to. And as you mentioned, the festivals are the same thing. If you're, one of the reasons that we theorized why Rolling Sets was so successful on the Central Coast prior to them moving to Newcastle this year, which we did do a whole breakdown of. If you're interested, you can go back and listen to an earlier episode of the pod. But we were saying that there was a real community around the Central Coast that just went to rolling sets, regardless of who was on the lineup, because it was a local festival. It was ours. We were excited by it because we, didn't really have something of that nature that was, we do have obviously other festivals, but it felt like it was, one of the big premier festivals. You'd see the lineup announced on Triple J, and you'd see other places around Australia talking about the lineup. It wasn't just a Central Coast centric thing. It was a big national event that was, people went to it just because it was in our backyard. It had that community aspect to it. Moving to Newcastle, we've debated whether that will continue or not, but you can certainly make that argument to venues now. They need that community there, like what Joe Hardy was talking about, because without it, you do now have people going, well, I can only afford to go out, once every couple of weeks. So I'm going to be a bit more cautious, or I'm going to, really make sure that when I'm spending that money, I feel like I'm getting my money's worth and I'm seeing an act who I really want to see, as opposed to, hey, it's my local, let's go out and have a good time and see live music because that's what I like to do. I think the cost of living also has a big part to play.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Hot take.
Yeah. The other interesting point that Joe Hardy made that I thought was really interesting and I can relate to was the point that a lot of live music is moving to non-traditional spaces. And I can speak to this having recently attended an event in Marrickville in Sydney that was not in a venue. It was like literally just sandwiched between two warehouses in the industrial area there. Part of the appeal of that, is the novelty, I think, but also part of the appeal for that is you can BYO. So you pay a little ticket, they tell you where it is, you go there, I'm sure it would probably be shut down if the police, were that way inclined, but it doesn't really seem to cause a problem. Everyone's respectful. And there's also these events happening, across the city every weekend in various places that aren't traditional music venues that can't access grant money or whatever. And those things are kind of BYO, they're less regulated. That, I think, is a big part of it as well. That's the appeal. People go, okay, well, I could go out and spend all this money, or I could just go and see the music that I like and not have to spend all this money. How you tackle this problem, I don't know, but there's so many factors that are contributing to it.
Was this part of the state government's, how they announced, might have been earlier this year, the 3 stages of reform that they were introducing for the nighttime economy, and one of it was being able to transform different spaces of the city at night, which would allow hospitality venues to stay open longer. It would also allow venues to put on live music that wouldn't traditionally be able to. And spaces like car parks or warehouse spaces could be transformed into a live music set. Do you know if this was part of that, or was this just someone taking the initiative and putting it on and rolling the dice and hoping it worked out?
I think it's option B. Though I think that's kind of comparable, but I think, there was obviously liquor licensing or RSA going on there. And that was like, there were no issues in that regard, but it would fall into a legal category. But I think there's more of that happening as people search for more ways to go out and enjoy themselves without breaking the bank. And of course, like as the pressures of paying for shit increases, these are the things that are going to crumble, and we have to ask ourselves, why are things getting so expensive and what can we do to address that? And I think that is a really big driver. But once you have finished giving us 5 stars on your podcasting platform of choice, this is another thing we'd love to hear your opinion on. Give us a comment, whether that be however you're consuming us. Like, can you relate to this story? Are you somebody who is going out less? Is it just because you're getting older and your priorities are shifting? Is it because it's too expensive, or has that never been part of your habits in the first place? I was reading a recent comment on one of our other videos that kind of related to this by somebody who said they were 29 and when they were younger, they couldn't afford it because they had no money. And as they've gotten older, their priorities mean they just can't, even though they might have the money to do that now. So again, we would really love to hear from you as to what you think is contributing, what role you may or may not play, and how it affects you as well. So please do let us know. But as I said before, like, we haven't left this with any new answers, I don't think. It's just more questions. But it's interesting to kind of flesh these things out. You see just a venue close. There's a lot more behind it, and a lot more contributing to it. And ultimately, if we can understand these things a bit better, people smarter than us can work out solutions, then hopefully less venues close.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is that less of these venues close, because as you said, they are still small businesses at the end of the day. A lot of these venues, And they're an opportunity as well for musicians to build their craft, to build an audience, and for an audience to discover new artists. And it's the whole ecosystem there because, we know it's more than just live music. These musicians can go on to really benefit local communities and local small businesses, and the flow and effects are real, both financially and also just, creatively as well. To your point, Eamon, we started this episode talking about the Odyssey. When you went to the movies, did you buy popcorn and a drink, and were you spending there, or were you going, I can't justify spending money on drinks there, so I'll just go to Coles or Woolies and buy a Coke and a bag of M&Ms because it's much cheaper than going out?
Bit of both. We got my partner loves popcorn, so we got popcorn. Yes. We didn't get anything else. We got some stuff from Coles beforehand. Same thing. But you genuinely and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, it's like you're really having to question each spend. And I've always been pretty good. Like I'm working all over the place. I'm a carpenter, so I'm always at different places. But always take my lunch. If I have to buy lunch one day, that's a considered decision. So many decisions at the moment are really considered financially. And even when you're working in that place, I've found the last few months really difficult post travel. Like for us, we've been overseas to come back and actually try and rebound financially. Like it's been 4 or 5 months. I reckon I'm just clawing my way back. And it's more complicated. Everyone's situation's different. I have a business, so I've got tax bills and all these kind of things that all factor in. But the point is, it hasn't always been this hard. And I didn't expect it to take me 4 or 5 months to climb my way back out of a hole. And of course, that impacts whether you go out and whether you go and spend money on certain things that I think are worthy of my money being spent. But if you just don't have the money to spend on it, you don't have the money to spend on it. And that's the fact. And you mentioned the business, Cam. Like the owners of MoshPit are not driving around in Rolls Royces. Very few venue operators are. So it's not like these people are getting super uber rich off of this either. Their operating conditions are just as hard as a business as ours are as individuals. Arguably harder in certain ways, in the way that what they're having to do regulatory wise and those kind of things. The fact is everything is just heaps expensive. And we're seeing the cracks forming of this, and the fault lines have been there for a while. The cracks are starting to appear. And unless we are able to kind of either ideally increase slow inflation and increase the amount of money that people get paid, as we're seeing, the richest people and the biggest companies continue to turn very handsome profits, then we're not going to arrest this. It's only going to get worse, and you're only going to see more things that happen outside of the scope of regularity, like what I mentioned with the parties and the events going on that are, illegal but cheap. You're going to see more of that happening. So this is I suppose it's got broader societal, but I think it is broader societal issue that we need to be discussing and talking about. And culture is, one of the first dominoes that's kind of falling as people have to clamp back on their spending.
Yeah, similar to you, we came back from an overseas trip at the start of the year, and same thing, it took 4 or 5 months for us to sort of start to get on our feet again, because not only are you coming back and you've got the expenses from the trip, but then you suddenly get hit with, your bills, and you're like, well, this takes priority over going to a live event. I need to pay the mortgage, I need to pay the insurance bill, I need to pay for my rates. Like all of these things start to add up on top of, I'd like to go out and see, this band who are playing locally in town at the local pub or local venue or whatever the case is. I can't justify it. Or you're doing, we mentioned the movies. I'll pay for the movie ticket, but I can't justify, the drinks and the popcorn and the snacks and everything else that goes on top of it, because that alone is minimum $50 just to get, for you and your partner to get a couple of drinks and a popcorn to split. That's like $50. That's stupid. Really, it is. And it's the same as going to see a live event. Okay, I can justify the ticket, but when I'm there, I'm going to want to drink and, or I need to book a hotel or all these other costs that are just, people are finding it harder to justify when you have other costs that are climbing. And as we said, at the end of the day, these venues, similar to the movie theaters, similar to every other sort of venue, it needs people coming through the doors to be able to stay afloat. And that's really what it comes down to. So we need to find ways to make it easier for people to do it, either through, we've seen travel discounts or, just making it easier for people to get to the venues, but also incentivizing them to come out so they can justify it at the end of the day, because it is getting harder and harder.
That it is. But hopefully it's not getting harder and harder for you to rate us 5 stars. I'm sorry. I thought we'd wrap it up with a reminder, because if you remembered at the start, hopefully you remember at the end. No.
Well, also on that note, a big shout out to all of our Patreon subscribers as
So
well.
true.
We often, try to encourage people to join the Patreon without really recognizing those who are already subscribed to our Patreon. So to our Patreon subscribers, thank you so much, because we're talking about, it's harder and harder to justify external expenditures on things, and you have committed money to us, every month for probably close to 12 months ago when we launched our Patreon. A lot of you were early adopters. So thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. And that money, we promise, isn't to line our pockets so we can go out and buy beers. It is so we can, we're building a kitty so we can create new projects that we think you'll be excited to see. So I just want to say thank you, and if you are under financial hardship, by all means, cancel your monthly subscription to our Patreon. But thank you for those who are subscribing. And if you do want to support us, if you can afford it, you get this podcast ad-free. You also, when we're organized enough, you get it earlier than everyone else as well. And yeah, as I say, you're supporting us to hopefully develop and fund future projects that we think you'll be excited to see.
Yes, indeed. So thanks for your listening. Hope you're doing all right. And we will be back next week with an interview. We've got a few in the works. Which one you get, we have yet to decide, but you're going to get one. We've got some cool interviews with some cool bands and identities that are coming up very soon. So we will see you then. Thank you very much for listening.
Bye.